Hello and welcome to another Artis Opus tutorial. Today we are covering not just how to paint a vampire lord, but also how to paint pretty snazzy true metallic red armour. That armour has a glaze over it. There is a fast method, there is a fancy method, super enjoyable, really high quality end result. Definitely encourage that anyone, if you're curious to see how I arrive at my paint schemes, we've got a section at the start, it'll be timestamped, skip it if you don't want to watch it, but it's just me figuring out how I worked out this paint scheme, and I think it was a pretty successful endeavour, so you might learn a bit from that. It's a really useful way to see, if you've got an aim in mind but you don't know how to achieve it, exactly how to go about, trying to get as close to the result that you've got in your head and get that onto a model. So I definitely would recommend that. This model is brilliant, real pleasure to paint it. Very excited for new vampire count stuff, so do let us know below if you'd like to see us covering more of the vampire count stuff that has been released recently. Soulblight Gravelords these days, everything's getting renamed. But yeah, that's it. Please like, please comment, please subscribe, hit us up with all your suggestions for future content, and like I said, if you want to skip the theory bit at the beginning, we do have the timestamps down there for your convenience. Let's jump in. Before we begin, just wanted to note one thing about this kit. So this is one of the kits where you've got a piece of armor that joins, back to back. So when you're clipping the bits for this and this off the sprue, because they've got joining points around here, just be careful you don't clip too much off, otherwise you'll end up with a great big gap there. If you do end up with a great big gap, then overglue it and sand it. I overglued mine and sanded it regardless. Just try and take it down so it was difficult to tell that it was two different pieces, but yeah, be careful with stuff like that, because if you clip too aggressively from the sprue, you'll end up with two edges that are meant to join like this, then you'll end up with a gap in them basically. So yeah, be mindful of that. I haven't actually decided what vein of red we're going to be using. I do have a book with some gorgeous cover work on there. I mean, how on earth are we going to achieve something that looks that shiny in a decent amount of time? Now, instead of testing anything on the model or anything like that, might be a surprise to some of you, this is just going to be set to the side, and what we're going to do is we're going to prime or base coat a couple of sections of our palette. This is a primed surface, so it's it's exactly the same as that model once it's been primed, and then we're going to put our clear red solution over it, and whichever one looks the best, that will be the way that we go with and choose for our model or potentially your army. So great way to experiment with stuff. This is one of the absolute bonuses of using a dry palette. I'm not against wet palettes, but you definitely don't get to learn stuff like this as a result of using them. Okay, I just masked off a little bit of my palette to test this stuff out. So we've got Retributor armor here, a mix of Retributor armor, black and Vallejo Game Air silver, and then a more pure Vallejo Game silver. So what I'm going to do is dry brush them, because I do want a couple of differences in texture and finish. Also noticeably the gold one fades from a pure gold to a silver gold. I'm just going to pop down a quick dry brush on them, and then we've also got the black section, which is going to get the full treatment as well. It's just going to get the black to silver version of it. So I'm going to buff up all of these. Obviously we've got a more obvious difference in texture on this one. That's because it's gone all the way from black to silver. These, it's not too noticeable apart from on the gold, but it's probably going to be the most important on the gold, so that's fine. Alright, so let's take off this masking tape, and then we can start testing them out with some other finishes over them. So hopefully this isn't a complete failure, but we are experimenting, so that is a possibility. So just to make this super clear what I'm doing, I'm going to put Blood Angels red at the top. Big splodge of medium in the middle. And I think because Flesh Terrors is so nuts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it with medium from the beginning. God, it's just such a strong colour. And we'll do a similar thing. Now obviously this is pretty wet. Could be the wrong... Ooh, that's nice. That's got some interesting colours to it. Anyway, before I got distracted by something being pretty, we've obviously got some pretty strong colours here. It's also over a fairly shiny metallic base, which is going to retard it a little. But yeah, let's give it some drying time and see what we end up with. We could, of course, varnish over these as well for some depth, but yeah, let's see how that goes. what learning points can we take from this? Now, if you recall, we had the most gold section down here. I think actually the colours here are pretty lovely, really interesting. This between gold and silver mix that we've got there, the kind of hybrid, that's come out quite interestingly as well. The depth in the black to silver dry brush I quite like, but the highlights are a little bit dull. So I think as a learning point from this, obviously, you know, these bits aren't dry and whatever. As a learning point from this, I think what has the most potential is to use a gold, but take it from a black base and leave some, you know, real harsh contrast in the recesses, and then hit this coat all over the top of it. Did some other tests here. This matting out is a bit of an issue, so I do think we're probably going to have to varnish this once we're done, but that's no bad thing, and it's always an interesting thing to experiment with. It's also a great way to use fast techniques and add a little bit more depth to them. So I reckon we've got our experimentation out the way. Let's rock on with the model. So we've got some black, Retributor armor and silver on the palette. I'm going to try out things first of all on this shield. That's a great place just to give stuff a test. So I'm looking to keep this as subtle as possible. Probably actually get away with using a medium here. I am actually going to take a little bit of black first of all. I know it's going to seem like a weird place to start, but I want to build this up. So as you can see, even though we've got black in there and we did what looked like, you know, really dulled the color down, still got some really nice hues to it. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to continue here, and we're going to transition all the way through until we've finished with a gold, and then we'll introduce some silver and get, you know, a pretty high degree of contrast and highlighting in here. Let's go to more pure Retributor now. Take a different part of my palette. My palette's going to end up looking nicer than the shield at this rate. Looks amazing. Now we're going to take some silver at this point, and we're going to do it with utmost care. So I've got like a dot. And even with that dot, it's still doing some work, so proof that it pays dividends to be careful. Nice. Okay, so that's very different from the Retributor we know, because the first stages were flavoured with black and the following stages were flavoured with silver. So we've ended up with this really kind of tarnished, far older looking colour. I'm going to leave it there. I love going to pretty extreme degrees with the highlights, but I'm just very aware that I don't want to screw this up. So I'm going to make sure that I've caught all the edges, and then we can rock on with the fun bit. Got my palette if I need it, but I actually think it's by far, and this is exactly what I was talking about at the start of the video, it's by far more relevant to make my mix here than it is to make it anywhere else. I'm going to start off with one drop of the voluptuous pink. I mentioned this before, I just really want a huge amount of depth and interest to this armor, and I want it to look very blood-like, so a little bit of purple in there, even though it's called pink. It won't hurt. One part Flesh Terror's red. Now this is a pretty kind of matte finish, strong contrast. So what we're going to do to balance that out, I'm just going to put a little bit of medium in there. Still looking potentially overpowering. 2 parts medium. Right, getting close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this thin, and we're just going to have to be ready to work fast if this isn't a colour that we're happy with. I think it's pretty good though. Alright, let's go. So I'm putting a fair bit on to begin with, but then I am taking my time and spreading it all over the piece. You don't want too much anywhere. As long as you work fast, you can remove any excess you've got. Make sure you go right to the edges. You're going to get one go with contrast. Now, after drying, that's it's pretty cool, but it's lost a bit of the depth that I would like. We'll get that when we varnish, so I don't need to do anything too over the top with respect to that, I don't think. What I am going to do though is quickly give it a final highlight. What this should do is, because I only pick out the raised areas, it's an extremely convenient way of adding a little bit of depth in with absolute minimal effort. To make sure your contrast is fully dry before doing this, obviously. It's quite an aggressive dry brush with just a tiny amount on the brush, so it is really important that you do let it dry, otherwise you're at risk of knocking off your contrast. So we're still keeping that depth. And let's contrast again. Can do it with a little bit more confidence this time. Again though, really making sure that it doesn't pull, so what I'm going to do is, as the paint runs down, I'll be grabbing my paint from the bottom and then taking it to the top. And also redistributing it manually, you know, I don't want it to pull on the eyes of the dragon and obscure any details, so just go in there and grab it. You've only got so much working time. Okay, so that has definitely added a little bit more depth there. Looking quite cool. Just for context, let's put it next to a black model. You know, that's pretty awesome effect. I'm fairly pleased with that. I'm going to leave that to the side. I've still not 100% made my mind up on the scheme. It's okay for the guy to have a shield that is, you know, of-ish the same scheme but doesn't completely match him, so time to jump onto the model. So we've still got everything on our palette that we used on the shield. We do want to be really careful with the building up of kind of color and texture on this guy. So what I'm going to be doing is really going gently and carefully. There's a lot of texture on the model and we want those edges to all be caught, so super gentle grip, take your time, and we're just going to buff him up. I'm going to move on to the medium. Actually, the reason for going from a small to a large, I know that seems the wrong way around to go, is because I've gotten the recesses now and I'm trying to hit more of the raised areas of the large one, so it's not an issue of access, and I actually prefer how paint comes off a larger brush. I'm going to start off with a retributor and then again just a tiny smidge. Of the silver's going to get introduced very carefully. Worked in thoroughly. Now what I'm going to do for this guy is, if we hold him under the light here, you'll see obviously this is metallic, so we're getting some nice reflections. I'm going to pick a direction and my model is going to be lighter from that direction, so I'm going to pick kind of a off angle from the chest, which is going to be in the direction that the face is looking towards with this model. Same again, we're just going to proceed with a fair amount of caution, and the main worry here is that we do not want to turn our model silver. That's, you know, it's very easy to do, and that's not what we're after. Take some of that silver. I'm not going to introduce any of the gold, but I am going to mix it in the brush thoroughly, which will help homogenize it, and I'm doing it on the same part of the palette that we did have the gold. Now what I want for this is for it to lightly catch edges, so it's okay with it being quite silver. So I'm not going to remove too much off the brush and make sure it's not going to smear or anything. Quite a lot on that brush. And so what we're going to do to control that is with a pressure, and that's going to be extremely light. And I am looking for this pretty much to be specifically just catching edges. So final highlight time. Just make sure that we can't get any streaking, and then specific edging. So this is going to be used along and against edges all over the model. Hopefully you can see it there. It's quite easy to pick them up. Show again on this wing. So just working against the angle of any particular edge on the miniature, all of them. Every single one of these you want to be hit. I've mixed up a fresh batch of the mix. Now going back, I'm going to approach this pretty carefully, so I'm going to go from the bottom to the top. Looking really tasty here. A couple of steps of detailing will go a long way. Completely optional, of course, at this point. I'm gonna take a little bit of contrast medium, mix in some of the blue. Just hold your blue here. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of black. You could use a black wash and mix blue in if you wanted, entirely up to you. And this is just gonna be for dotting rivets. Just make sure we don't have too much excess on here. I do really want these rivets to be able to stand out. And I'm okay with some of this blue getting into the very recesses as well. It won't stand out as much as you'd think. It'll just kind of make everything look a little bit darker in there, add a little bit of depth. So I'm going to go around, dot these rivets, and I may selectively use it to kind of panel line or push contrast elsewhere on the miniature as well. I'll just show you another example of that. Up to you if you want to exaggerate anything or push any particular, sections. If you've got stepped armor here and you wanted to exaggerate it, you could drop it in the middle. Just down to personal preference. So I'm gonna go around and they should push the contrast a little bit more. If you are looking to use this blue, fairly broadly to deepen anything, because of the amount of medium we've got in there, it's not something you need to be too worried about. You can see I've popped quite a big section here. But if I were to take this elbow armor, that's definitely the technical name for it, elbow armor. Sure, King Henry V went into battle using elbow armor. Anyway, these bits, whatever they are, that's how I would do it there. And to show on this one, just a general kind of selective wash application, but this thing isn't dangerous, it doesn't show up too much there. The reason why it works on this model is because it provides such a nice point of contrast and source of contrast, but it's fairly forgiving and quite hard to go wrong with. So really nice to work with in general, actually. So I'm just doing little details, sometimes it's like black lining, sometimes it's shading. And it should just help everything stand out, basically. Really nice way to be able to take a technique that you've used on your troops and bring it up to a character level without changing the base recipe at all, because, maybe this isn't efficient for you to spend time doing on foot troops, but it's absolutely fine to spend it on your leader or whatever, and I think it adds a real nice extra additional layer to it. Just to give you an idea of how little you need to worry about using this stuff, if I wanted, for example, to exaggerate the shading towards the bottom of this panel here, because we've got the same contrast medium in and stuff, it's even got a pretty similar finish to it. Just do be aware that if you go full on with glazing it, you might build up some additional shine, so it could start standing out in comparison to the other stuff. But just wanted to show you how kind of gung-ho you could be with it without needing to worry about it doing unwanted stuff to your paint job. See this elbow, gained a load of depth there, so you can go full on with this stuff. If you wanted to treat the rest as a base layer and then spend a load of time doing really fancy character shading, really ramp this up, you absolutely could. And the nice thing is, because you're adding color to the shades rather than to the highlights, you'd keep that red hue without turning it pinky or orangey or something like that. And I think kind of dark red looks pretty amazing on vampires. I popped some scratches on the shield just to test how it looks. I'm not sure if I want the guy to look, battle worn. He is a vampire lord. He is meant to be amazingly skilled in battle. So what I'm going to do is I've concentrated some deflected attack marks on the shield. I've put a little bit of a stuttering, dryish highlight on these edges. I'll show you what that means now. Take a little bit of the gold, tiny touch of the silver because it is super strong. Even scoop up a bit of the red just to help homogenize it with the armor. And what do we do at this point? I've not used as much water on my brush as I would do normally, so I've made this kind of rose gold and can test it somewhere else. Looks like it's about right. Remove a little bit more just to be sure, and if I pick an edge here on the back, I'm just very gently catching edges, but I'm trying to not catch it in a straight line, I think that really helps stuff look metallic. This guy's looking pretty cool, pretty happy with him. He's pretty much done. Gonna do the same with a weapon. I'll concentrate some chipping towards the edges, give it a couple of black washes. That's just been dry brushed with the silver with a little bit of black in it. I'll put the same blue wash on it to tie it in, and I'm gonna concentrate on the head. Amazing tip here. So grabbed a and then along the edges of this, It's going to allow me just to put some little flicky, scratchy combat marks and do basically a very strange version of dry brushing. It's just really good for organic surfaces, and because of the small nature of the brush, it can get right in the recesses, and because it's so stiff, it's quite good for flicking motions. He's been base coated with Fenrisian Grey, which is an interesting colour for faces, but I think it should end up with quite a nice tone on the model. But what I'm going to do is just hit this directionally from the top. Not worried about getting his hair, this is fine for that too. So you can see here, I should have exaggerated that nicely. Hers, forgot which one it is. So you can do the same thing but from a really extreme angle, just with pure white, and then we're going to dry brush over this. Okay, probably won't show up too much, but it's definitely brighter from above. So a little bit of dry brushing should help catch the details on the hair, then we'll be able to black out the bats and go with the rest of it. And for the face, what I'm going to do is inject a tiny amount of alive human nature into there, and I'll do that by using a very subtle red. Grab Blood Angels, could use Flesh Tearers if you wanted to stay super coherent. The reason that I'm using this one is it's just a bit softer. Take that, a large amount of contrast medium proportionally, and a little bit of Seraphim Sepia. It's one of my go-to ways to make things look a little bit more alive. The sepia is quite a soft wash. Sorry viewers, no, you don't like me dipping it. Anyway, okay, that's a bit better. Take a lot of it off, a lot. Too strong, so I'm going to get some water. I'm working fast. Basically absorb it out. Leave a tiny bit of it there, but just in the recesses, and then try and remove quite a lot from the forehead. There you go, so that will inject a little bit more life into it, but it still looks pretty undead. Let that fully dry and then we can do something about the bats. Taking it pretty easy with the bats, what I've got is a mix of Vallejo 950 Black. I've used that because it's a strong one and it's matte. And I've just mixed it in with the contrast Skeleton Horde to give it a little bit of a brown tint. I'm going to wash them carefully a couple of times and that should, you know, pretty much take them out. I don't want these to be black. I think that might look a little bit odd and it would probably require some highlighting that I don't want to do. So I'm going to work down, even if it takes, you know, 3 careful washes. That's still easier than picking out faces or tummies or, you know, wing pinions or anything like that. So this is what we're going with. This one's quite a difficult one to photograph. You've got a difficulty because there's a very white matte face and then there's a very shiny deep armor, and cameras are always going to struggle with those. I did go a bit chalky on the face though, which I'm not too pleased about. One of the, if not the only downside to the monument paints that I've discovered is that they can get a little bit grainy because they are so matte. So I quickly whacked a glaze of Keysler Flesh over the top of it just to rein it back in a bit, but if you do get that issue, the same as I have, particularly with the very light colours, the ivory that I used and the white, it can happen. So you can mix those in with another paint, particularly a GW one, they're a bit more satin and silky, and that'll kind of help rein it back. Anyway, I think this is amazing. I would legit do an army in this scheme. I think that'd be like a brilliant and striking way to go about achieving, you know, that's a result that's really going to stand out on the tabletop for anyone. Maybe I would have put some more contrast on the shield, could put some matte black on there or something. The shield does cover a lot of the model. I prefer this model without the shield. Not sure if there's a way that I can achieve that with a conversion if I was to do it again, but it's really made me want to paint some Blood Knights. I think it's super successful. Just to cover again what I said about the steps you could skip. So we did the gold dry brush, then we did gold and silver mix, then we did a very light one that was majority silver, and then we did a few layers of our wash. So the wash mix once, the wash mix again, and then we did the blue wash. then dotted details and stuff like that, but a lot of that is to taste. So if you wanted to do this on an army level, you could just do, you know, straight in there with a 2 parts gold, 1 part silver dry brush, and just use that dry brush, you know, pretty much entirely. You don't even have to do a final silver after that or anything. And then you could go in with a heavier wash that hadn't been diluted as much, do it all over the model, and you'd still get a super solid result. Equally, you don't have to do, you know, the chipping stage I did at the end with the stuttering highlight. You don't have to do the blue wash if you don't want, or you could have done the blue wash in an easier way, you know, like spray the entire thing with a varnish and then wash the lot or something like that. So there's a load of ways that you could condense this and make it more easy. Hopefully you guys found the kind of process of me figuring out my own paint scheme useful. Use your texture palettes, guys. Like if you've got one, they are an amazing resource, and just feel free to experiment. And what I found here is the time that I would have lost, you know, playing around on the model, building up layers of paint, maybe having to delete stuff, or you know, paint it black and start again and obscuring detail. I just did it on my palette. Super easy, super practical, great learning tool. And you know, a lot of the time on the palette, you're gonna have some of the colors that you might use anyway. So you might already have a bit of Retributor armor down on the corner of it. You just pop a wash over it and see if it works. I'm a real fan of experimentation and, you know, working out general rules and principles and trying to fit them to the idea that I've got in my head, as I said in the intro. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the VC content. I do really love the Varn bag counts. I love their aesthetic. Where are we? Look at that. What's not to like about that? Amazing. Yeah, I may well be doing some more of these guys in the near future, as well as the Slaanesh. Definitely got quite a lot of love for them, and I think the Blood Knights kit looks pretty good, and I do have one, so maybe that'll make its way into a future video. Anyway, if there is something specific you'd like to see, let us know down below in the comments. Please like, please comment, please subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll catch you in the next video.